So there is that global picture. There's the African picture, 1.4% growth this year, possibly 3% next year. Why? It's embarrassing when you're in Washington because they say, you see, you two guys, Nigeria and South Africa, you're the reason for 1.4. So there's a responsibility that comes our way if you want to pick up the numbers on the African continent as well. Thirdly, we're stuck on the right side of the 0% growth. But clearly that's not enough, and much more needs to be done. And fourth, what we point out in the speech, and it's becoming clear for some time now, so it's not something new that we've created, it's not a treasury view, it's a government view, that you need a combination of efforts. You need macro stability, you need fiscal measures and monetary measures at that level. Secondly, you need confidence and a clear, unmitigated focus on growth. And so everybody has to ask, what's my contribution to investing, to creating confidence, to creating jobs, to helping new enterprises develop? David Lipton, as I quoted yesterday, the deputy MD of the IMF, says, and many others have said it, our economy is too concentrated. It doesn't allow enough competition. Yet all of you here will say, I'm a capitalist. And the essence of capitalism is competition, right? And yet, given our history and where we come from, there's lack of that. So you have a very underdeveloped area in terms of small and medium-sized businesses and so on, where a lot of focus needs to actually go. The fourth area is the real economy, microeconomic stuff that's going on in government. I went through a long list of that yesterday, of what each minister is doing. But we all recognize that we don't have, let's call it, haven't reached critical mass. So how do we multiply those initiatives together with the private sector in order that you reach critical mass and that 0.5 becomes 2.5 for a start? And what would it take to actually get there at this point in time? But finally, we're also saying none of this can be done by government or labor or business alone. And that's why we've invested, all of us, a huge amount of time for the better part of the year. It's related partly to ratings. But more importantly, it's related to creating the right level of trust, cooperation, practical projects being actually done, so that the right climate can be created for South Africans together to say, despite our differences, despite our different interests, because we all have different interests, right? Can you put inclusive growth top of the agenda? Because once you get that right, all of your other numbers fall into place. All of the other ratios take care of themselves, because the denominator has taken care of itself, in a sense. Sounds like magic. It's not quite magic. It's hard work. But it can, in fact, be done.
In a way, I suppose, where we really see a need for inclusive growth is in the issues that we're currently seeing in the tertiary education sphere. And yesterday, you, along with your deputy minister, actually went outside the National Assembly and spoke to students. You acknowledged them as you began your speech. Now, one of the demands from the students is a date for which we can see free tertiary education realized. What is a realistic time frame for this?
You know, I'm sure all of you are familiar that when you have large movements of people around a cause, I've been at that age, I'm sure all of you have been, you didn't get to where you are by jumping 25. Maximalist demands often emerge in the course of these engagements and struggles. So I think we've got to be careful to place these matters in perspective, firstly. Secondly, we have a very clear policy. Those who are poor and those families that come from poor backgrounds, and now inclusive of families up to 600,000 income, they will be taken care of. That is clearly enunciated. The second thing that we said is that we've received a number of, well, let's call them technical proposals, from students, from academics, from universities, from the private sector. We need time to evaluate them. But the essence of those proposals is how do you leverage the fiscus and the private sector resources so that you can find this pool for a policy purpose. The government's position is quite clear. If my children can afford to have their fees paid by me, I must pay them. That's quite clear. So I think the slogan must be differentiated from the practical realities and a pragmatic approach where A, we say we recognize your difficulties, B, we know that certain shifts are required in terms of either policy or thresholds or accommodating certain concerns. C, we found money in February this year. D, we found money now to look at this particular situation. And E, there's a longer term set of issues that we need to take care of. And that might take a few weeks or a month or two as we evaluate those proposals. The aim ultimately is to relieve the pressure on poor students and make sure they get access. But the other point that comes through in this debate is that you can't look at higher education as an isolated thing. We need to look at the education system as a whole. There's a huge constituency of people in the academia and elsewhere who would also say, put similar effort into early childhood education. Because if you do that, in generations to come, you wouldn't have many of the difficulties you're having today. So when we take government's commitment to education as a whole, I just don't have the number, it's a formidable number, but the distribution in that system to different sectors of the system is something that we need to look at in a balanced kind of way. We need to look after our children and ensure that those who are 4, 5, 6 years old today, in 10 years' time, have a very different life prospect from the 15 and 16-year-olds today.
Our accountants who are listening probably want to know where that 17.6 billion rand that will be proposed for post-school education next year, where will that money actually come from?
Since they're accountants, let them do some more thinking. You mean in tax terms? Or
in terms of 17.6 billion rand has been proposed,
yeah.
And where is that going to come from in the tight fiscal space that we're in?
That's the magic we have to perform every year.
And you do that?
We've done it. In February this year, we had no time, and we still produced 16 billion rands over 3 years. So, I mean, if you go to the fiscal side, what are we actually saying? Excuse me for the coughing. We're saying you have 0.5% growth, 23 billion rands less in tax coming this year. Logically, so that's on the one side. On the other side, your debt is hitting 46, 47, 48%. The deficit requires consolidation. And that is why we titled our approach a measured and balanced fiscal consolidation. So with all these threatening elements around us, how do you navigate a fiscal path was the question that we had to ask. And the way you do it is you reduce expenditure, as you've seen. We've done it from the last couple, in fact, since 2012. Expenditure has been systematically constrained by between 10 and 13 billion rands a year. Second, you shift priorities. Third, you try to cap the compensation budget, which is somewhere between 37 and 40%, depending on which numbers you use, of the total non-interest expenditure. 5, recognize the fact that while debt is 2 trillion rands, you're paying what? This year 147 billion rands in interest, next year 160-something billion rands in interest. We can't afford to be there. You can't afford to spend so much of money on interest. So you've got to control the debt element as well. So it's in this mix that tax increases come in. And we said 28 billion next year, and for the next 2 or 3 years, more of that as well. So we've got to take some short-term pain as government and as a people on the one side. On the other side, we need to build on our resilience, as we said, and focus on creating both the conditions and the actual dynamic of growth, which in a year or two, as I said earlier on, can completely change this picture. But it means working together. It means having a common set of ideas about where we want to go. And the CEO initiative and the various work that we did with the labor leaders gives us a lot of room for optimism. We now, in the next week, at a conversion point. We've done the first conversion. There's a small business fund, there's the youth initiative, there's the investment initiative, there's the ratings initiative. What's next? Because the work can't stop there in order to continue to enhance ourselves on this road. And we, as partners, certainly intend to continue to do that.
Minister, we have one more fees must fall related question, this time from a viewer at home. This is coming from Samuel Raselabe, who says, the working class are the most burdened by tertiary education fees. The poor are assisted by the state, while the rich earn enough to support their children, which is what you've said. So can't we introduce an education tax, Minister? We as the working class have no problem with that.
Well, you know, all proposals for tax are welcome. We'll consider them in January next year.
I'll be sure to feed that back to Samuel.
But that's the idea, that's the level of involvement we want. We don't want stone throwing and burning and destruction. What you want is constructive ideas, however they have been thought through, wherever they actually come from. Because that is a way of all of us becoming part of the solution, right? Rather than just being critical of one another and then saying you're not doing enough or you're not doing enough. Become part of the solution. Add your bit. It could be 10 Rand donation to somebody on the one side. It could be a 10 million Rand donation to somebody else to start a bursary fund somewhere. It could be ideas which will magically take us out of this corner and take us in a new kind of direction. And I think there are more South Africans of goodwill on many of the issues that we are talking about than otherwise. There are the few who think that, for example, downgrades don't matter, doesn't matter if this happens, we'll have a better political climate to rabble-rouse, and so on and so on. That's reckless and something that should never be allowed in South Africa. But if that factor is to be contained, then the majority sensible people in South Africa need to move. They need to become participants in the process of finding solutions to the problems of the majority, not just our individual families.
Now, your department's been working hard at finding solutions in the state-owned enterprises sphere, and yesterday you mentioned a specific focus on SAA, the Post Office, Eskom, and SANRAL. It's been a long road that you've been walking with these SOEs. Has it been a more challenging task than you initially anticipated it would be?
Look, this is a collective government effort. Treasury is a vigilant watcher on the financial side. So what we want to see is good financial decisions. We want to see projects that abide by the Constitution and the law. We don't want to see boards pointing fingers or showing the middle finger to the Public Finance Management Act. We want good governance at the level of boards. That's a matter I'll come back to. But the most important thing that our observers and investors will be worried about is, do any of these practices constitute a fiscal risk? So I'm not sure if all of you have this MTBPS booklet, but at the back there's a fiscal risk analysis. Read that analysis. It very frankly says, what are some of the challenges that we face? What are the risks that we face? How could we mitigate them? So the Treasury officials and ourselves have done an excellent job at transparently telling the South African public, this is where we are. That's point one. Point two, there is the structure, initially led by the Deputy President, the IMC still is, and it's under his guidance that issues of governance, choice and nomination of people on boards, the remuneration structure or framework within which they work, the finances of the SOEs, the policy for private sector participation in SOEs, all these are policy matters that have been gathering steam, and pretty soon we will make some choices as we go. So it's work on the way, but we do need an acknowledgement from everyone concerned that in many instances we can't carry on as we are. There are shifts that are actually required.
Minister, many South Africans believe that at the center of the crossroads are plans to procure nuclear energy. Eskom goes on the record quite a lot saying that renewable energy is becoming too expensive. You dismissed this yesterday and advised Eskom to follow an updated energy plan. There seems to be a slight disconnect between Eskom and Treasury. And South Africans are concerned. And the question is, how will Treasury take a leadership stand in this matter?
Yeah, again, it's not Treasury versus Eskom, it's government as a whole. We have one government, one constitution, we have one Public Finance Management Act, there's one set of rules for the game, there's one set of procurement processes that need to be followed. So anything that anybody does in government. I mean, if you go outside on the beach, whichever beach you like, but Durban beaches are much better than yours. That's where I come from. You will have to stick to the rules. So that's the first set of parameters we need to set forward. Second, let's do the studies. CSIR has just published a study. It says very clearly who stands where in the stakes. I haven't had time to read it yet, but we trust scientific institutions. So let's have a look at the study and see what it produces. Thirdly, there is an integrated resource plan, an old one. There's one that's been updated at the moment by the Department of Energy. So you should ask them where this process is. Part of that mix is gas, renewables, coal, and nuclear. So nuclear is not out of the blue. You are, in fact, the proud owners of nuclear, this part of the world, or this part of our country. The fifth point is that there is that intent to move into that amongst other directions in terms of increasing our nuclear capacity. But the question is, and has always been, well, what do you really need? How will you procure it? Will it be consistent with the Constitution and the law? And the question of affordability and what kind of financial structure is to be applied to it. Now, all of that is work in progress. As soon as the Department of Energy is ready, they must come out with the stuff. Where we come in is to advise either on the procurement side, which we've begun to do, and on the financial modeling side, where some work has been done. And pretty soon, all of this must be made transparent to the public as to exactly how is it going to happen. So either you like it or you don't like it, and you have all sorts of lobbies in Cape Town and elsewhere. But the essence is transparency. Let's open it up so that everybody can examine whatever numbers there are, whatever intent there is, and we can then have a national discourse on what we require as a country or what we don't. Renewables is very much part of a global commitment we've made to climate change. And we have probably the top 2 or 3 renewable projects in the world in terms of scale, sophistication, involvement of the private sector. Yes, there's a 200 billion rand guarantee that currently backs it, but we've got to do some work on that side as well and take some of the load off the state in terms of contingent liabilities as well. But now you don't throw away something good like that or throw dirt at it because you have other intentions. And so public officials need to be careful about how they articulate themselves and make sure that they help South Africa keep a consistent public message, notwithstanding whatever factors need to be taken into account. And ultimately, it's data, facts, and affordability and compliance with the law that will decide what happens and when it happens.
Let's talk a little about confidence. Now,
I thought we had talked a little already.
a little more, please, Minister, about confidence this time. You've been working hard with captains of industry in speaking to the international community about South Africa in an attempt to bolster confidence. So what I want you to let us in on, please, is in your experience, what is that one thing that international investors are still concerned about when it comes to South Africa and our economy? What's keeping them up at night?
Well, you know, you get 2 types of investors, as you know, and I'm sure they're sitting here as well. The one is your portfolio investor, and the other is the real economy investor. I think on the real economy side, there are far-sighted business people who see huge opportunities in basing either headquarters or manufacturing plants or other operations in the kind of sophisticated business environment that we have here and extending it into Africa. So you hear this all the time, whether it's a financial sector, and you've got new entrants now as well in the form of the Chinese coming in with a motor plant in, I think it is PE. So there are those incremental investments, but even on that, we as South Africa Incorporated need to show a greater sense of hunger to bring in FDI into the economy, bring in the technology and the sophistication that comes with that, and upgrade our own industrial capability over and above the kind of effort that we put into our own innovation R&D, where there's a lot of space, by the way, for collaboration between science institutions and universities, which we haven't fully exploited. On the portfolio side, people want to know whether if they lend you money, it's safe. And the simple proposition is, are you willing and able to pay? And as long as we have a credible fiscal framework, the answer is yes. But their concerns raised through the ratings agencies would be, is your politics going to become unsettling? Secondly, where is your growth going to come from? And thirdly, can we rely on your institutions? I think on the institutional front, we're on a good footing. Where is the growth going to come from is the central attention that we're trying to bring everybody's minds to. And on the politics, well, politics is politics. Politics, by the way, if you look at it more generally, has been the single most, inverted commas, disruptive factor throughout the world. So the best examples you would be familiar with is Brexit and what it has done and the uncertainty that it has created. Read Martin Wolf anytime now for the last 3 months in the FT. He will focus on the connection between political decision making and sometimes gymnastics and the economy and economic decisions and the impact on countries as a whole. But also politics comes to the fore because politics is your relationship as representatives to your citizens. And that's a point that now I was very surprised when I went to the IMF World Bank meeting recently and the G20 meeting before that your global elite is absolutely worried. They're worried, I'm sure some of you have read it, about the level of distrust between elites and citizens, the lack of confidence amongst citizens in whether governments are doing the right thing, the diminishing trust that is also developing, some elements of which we actually see here. The worry that globalization has only benefited the top, take whatever percent you want, 1 or 10%, and that the majority is not benefiting. And so a lot of the global preoccupation now is how do benefits get shared amongst populations and not get creamed off at the top. And I imagine that's going to start a whole new discourse globally as well. In our own case, we politely call ourselves a noisy democracy. And I think one of the appeals that everybody is making at a leadership level, whether from civil society or people in political parties, is can we find this little space, this little moment where we just reflect on the country and the national interest rather than ourselves, and say what's in the best interest of the country right now? How do you bring all of the diverse and maybe not so diverse voices and representatives together and create some common purpose? Otherwise, the buffalo does indeed get away. This audience missed it.
The limping buffalo.
The limping buffalo. Does it make a difference? No. It's too early for Cape Town, I told you.
Minister, next week you'll be appearing in courts of law on a charge of fraud.
Today is Thursday, right?
Yes.
Next week only starts on Monday.
And
On the 2nd of November.
And I remember yesterday you asked the media very kindly to leave that alone, and I'm not asking a question on that, to be clear.
Then why you started, you see?
Yes. I confuse myself sometimes, Minister. Yesterday you referred to the unsettling effects of these matters in your speech. How did it affect you as you prepared and delivered for the mini-budget yesterday?
You know, in any piece of work that you do, and I'm sure it applies to all of us, you always have a main focus, and you will get bits of distraction from time to time. And the important responsibility we as a team had in the last couple of weeks was to focus on the country and produce a credible mini-budget, stroke MTBPS, and make sure that we put the country's best foot forward. And I hope we've done that yesterday. And that was our focus. Now the rest we'll worry about next week.
Minister, we have one last question for you before we open it up to the floor. And yesterday in the office, we asked our colleagues, what's the one question you want to ask Minister Gordhan? And one of our colleagues, Liesl, who's sitting here, said, and I quote, "You must have one hell of a support network." Tell us about that.
It's all of you. Thank you very much. And of course, it's my family and the colleagues at the Treasury. It's not easy. And I said that at the end as well. For 12 to 1,400 people in the Treasury to be the target of many of these things and serve you as South Africa in the patriotic way they do. So South Africa, no, forget about individuals like us, we'll come and go. It's institutions that matter, but it's those human beings who stay at the Treasury. They could be working for News 24 or somebody else right now. They stay there, they do their work, they commit themselves to this country and to the development path that we've chosen. Applaud them.
We now have time to open questions up. We will take 3 questions. Minister,
Can't
you
the Deputy Minister join me?
Absolutely.
Yes, please.
He's gone to the SA interview.
Already? Okay.
So 3 questions. Erin, there's one right next to you. We have one at the back here. Cindy. If you could just introduce yourself, please, and keep it quite brief. Thank you.
Good morning, Minister. I'm Deborah Tickle. I'm from KPMG, and I also sit on your Davies Tax Committee. So
Don't
very
give any
nice to chat
secrets
to you
away.
this morning.
Don't give any secrets
I'm
away.
not going to give any difficult tax questions, don't worry. Congratulations on a great speech yesterday. It was well designed to allay the fears of the ratings agencies. But I guess the questions in my mind, and these are not KPMG's thoughts or the Davies Tax Committee thoughts, but the question I have is that you talked a lot about inclusiveness and acting as a team and the limping buffalo, and that we must be the strong lion. But you seem to speak alone a lot of the time, and does the rest of government really have the political will to effect the policies that will make investment in this country and the desire for us as business leaders to continue to invest in this country along with you? In other words, are you acting as a team, as a government? Thank you.
Another question, please?
Where's the next one? Ah, there you go.
Does KPMG always act as a team? Does KPMG always act as a team? I don't think so. Then you're living in a fool's paradise.
Hi, it's Janet Hurd from Media 24.
Hello again, Janet.
We're gonna revisit that question, I'm afraid. The one question.
Freedom of speech is in the Constitution. Freedom of answer isn't.
Okay. I'll start with the other question then. Okay. You indicated, I think correctly, about the need to see education as a whole and not in isolation. And the focus has been on higher education. Can you just explain, there's also on another level we have a situation where we have a big cabinet, lots of portfolios. I was just thinking yesterday after you were speaking that is it not perhaps a thought, would it not help to consolidate portfolios and actually perhaps return to a single education portfolio, which could solve a whole lot of problems in terms of the bloated cabinet as well, and look at education? I'm just wondering if there hasn't been the split has not caused a schism between the two where they don't talk to each other that could be aggravating the problems in the country. And then secondly, yesterday you said that today is the medium-term budget policy, so you're not going to talk about next week, but today is the next day, the day after. Could you not just give us
next week is still next week.
Could you not just give us some kind of idea of how you're building up to next week? Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. We'll take one more before the Minister answers this round.
Take it. There we go. I'll hold it. Let me hold it.
Morning, Minister. I'm Francois Conradi from NKC African Economics. And I was hoping you might elaborate on what you were referring to when you talked about restructuring the state airlines and the possible introduction of a strategic equity partner and rationalization of government's shareholdings in the telecommunications sector. Thanks.
The SAA one has been in town for some time. So the essential idea there is still to ensure that the silliness of 3 state-owned airlines running the same route almost at the same time is something that obviously we must rationalize in some way. But the bottom line is that there's agreement that SAX and SAA should be looked into. A transaction advisor has been appointed. A process of evaluation, I think, has now started. I'm not sure exactly where it is. And when we get to the end result, we'll make the decisions that need to be made to start that process. Because many of these two in particular carry guarantees, and there's huge potential for, what shall we say, rationalization and efficiencies to be actually introduced as well. So that'll take probably a little while, another 6 to 9 months, to get to a point where we have some clarity on where we're going. On the telecom side, we have a number of structures, Infraco, et cetera, et cetera. So that's Minister Kwele's area. All we were saying is that our intent there, like elsewhere, must be to see where rational solutions can be found and synergies created. But the emphasis really in all of this is we need to get things done quickly rather than keep talking about them. And that's the emphasis, Francois, that you would have seen. Janet, on education, there used to be a single portfolio, and then changed in 2009. Excuse me. And I'm sure you have business consultants here in the audience who would tell you that sometimes when you need focus, you restructure so that you can get focus. And I suppose you reach a point at other times when you say, move in the opposite direction and bring things together if they're right. So it's a matter of choice and a matter of where we find ourselves on a particular development curve and how we look at that. But it's an idea that we can actually share. I don't know what you want to know about next week. There's supposed to be a court appearance on the 2nd. There's still a lot of noise in the air, so to speak, in terms of applications from various NGOs and so on. And what else can one say except that, you can see I'm choosing my words carefully, right? When I was interviewed by Bloomberg in New York, I said this is just political mischief. The CEOs that have come out in support of this issue have called it politically motivated. I leave it to you as citizens to work that out. Okay. On Deborah's point about speaking alone, you can't speak alone, you'll just get fired. But that's not the point. In any organizational situation, News 24 or NASPERS or KPMG or anywhere else, you either have a consensus building culture where despite differences on a particular view, you make an attempt to find some middle ground amongst different views and build on that consensus, which doesn't mean total unanimity. Very few human situations lend themselves to total unanimity, as you know, even in a family situation. So what we, I think, have common agreement on is the Constitution, is the National Development Plan, are the various programs that are at play. And yes, you will have situations in which you will have either actions or articulations which either create the impression or are in reality moving in slightly different directions. Now, that will happen, and then you must take the extra effort to go and seek alignment again, where it is possible. And in doing so, any one of us will say, alignment on X is an absolute priority, but alignment on Y can wait a little while, because X is what requires our focus at this point in time. And wherever possible, our approach that we're trying to generate as a culture in the Treasury is to be collaborative, is to be problem solving, and to be pragmatic, but within the law. What some people don't like is when this little booklet comes out called the PFMA. But that is a law. It's passed by a democratic institution called Parliament. And one can't pick and choose in these sorts of instances. You stick to the law. And any temptation to go outside will then create difficulties for us. So nobody will disagree with you that all of us, not just Treasury or government, but all of us need to speak as a team, right? How many of us would say the same things about the positive things about our country whenever we are asked over a cocktail? You have a shared responsibility to sell your country, create not false confidence, but certainly create confidence in our country. That's not a government job. The beneficiary of any confidence building process, the benefit of any investment process is not a benefit accruing to government. Yes, we can collect a bit more revenue on the side if the right things happen. The benefit is to South Africans. So, can South Africans take ownership of their country? Can South Africans become involved in determining the destiny of their country, but also make a stake, put a stake in? You know, not just on the JSE. Put a stake into the country so that we can all make it work for future generations. So we'll get there. We'll get there. You will never have unanimity, except I don't know. If you all agree to wear a red tie or a red dress tomorrow, maybe you might make it. But for the rest, building consensus is very much the South African way, by the way. That's where we've come from since 1994. And it needs extraordinary people in very ordinary situations to actually show what it means to be forgiving or to be generous or go the extra mile or step back sometimes in order that we create that little space in which we can actually find each other. And the soft side of what we're talking about is as important as the figures, KPMG. So the numbers are important, but the soft side is equally important. You get some of the soft side right, the numbers begin to take care of themselves.
We have time for one more question for the Minister.
Good morning, Minister. Arabile Kumete from Bloomberg.
Are you allowed to ask questions in a competitions environment?
I'd like to hope so. Minister, just really two questions. When we spoke to you in February as Bloomberg, we asked you whether you still feel as though you had the political backing to head
man, that's
into
boring
October.
stuff, man.
Just wanted to ask if you, one, still feel that way. Two, growth, you did revise that lower to 0.5%. At the same time, the deficits are set to moderate at a later stage. Do you feel that the budget, the midterm budget itself, is credible enough to allay fears from particularly ratings agencies?
I haven't spoken to them. I haven't spoken to the ratings agencies. And the answer you got yesterday, 10 hours ago, plus minus, was that our preoccupation is not rating agencies. Our preoccupation is putting the country on the right footing. And I said this right at the beginning, that if we make the right choices about growth, if we build the right consensus, if we put our half or fully developed plans into action, if we can get the right balance between macroeconomic stability and real economy interventions and build the confidence that is required to get investment going, everybody, including ratings agencies and our own people, far more importantly, will believe that we as a government, but also as an elite, are doing the right things by them at the end of the day. So we'll have exchanges with the ratings agencies, I think pretty soon, 2 of them. And I certainly believe that we have a product to sell on your behalf. And to convince South Africans that government has done as well as it could in these circumstances. But in doing so, we've been very frank. We've been very frank about what the limits are, but also what the possibilities are and where the hope lies and where the opportunities lie. But hope and opportunity are like fruit on a tree. Leave them there forever and they will rot. Seize them and make something of it, you can add value to it. And the real challenge I think we have is, how do you seize the fruit? How do you seize the moment? So I'm going back to my good old activist days, trying to mobilize all of you and saying, become active, become involved, engage in some kind of way. Don't become distant visitors in your own country, right? And find different avenues and ways. Hopefully, the opportunity you have today is one of them, to come up with that. We might have all very different ideas. That's fine, but you're involved, not disengaged. Disengagement, as you know from your own employment situation or your firms, is the worst position to have an employee in. Am I right? Where you're sitting back, I don't care what the firm does, I don't care where it goes, etc., etc. Being engaged in some way offers possibilities for us to actually go forward. Your first question, I don't want to duck it, but I'm not going to answer it.
Minister, thank you so much for your time and congratulations on your speech.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, to have some more breakfast, coffee and tea. Thank you.